We are back and we are joined by Joshua A. Cohen, aka Ettingermentum, over at the Ettingermentum Substack. He also writes over at The Nation. Josh is in the middle of a stormy part of the country right now. I know a lot of folks are as well, so his power just went out. Thanks for joining us by phone, Josh.
Yeah, it momentarily went out. When it goes up for like a second, then it comes back on, which is generally kind of fine, but inconvenient when you're trying to do like live streaming like this.
Yeah, it's
But
not convenient,
so,
but I wanted to have you on regardless because you had two great pieces on your Substack. But let's start with the latest one. This election isn't a toss-up. For people that don't know, Josh is like the both has good politics and also is really good at reading the polls. You were right about there not being a red wave in 2022. You were right about Biden dropping out and what that would mean for the polling. And so your assessment of the race is rosier, I think, than what we're hearing in a lot of news coverage of this, which is that it's a toss-up, that this is a
yeah,
razor thin margin. But like, let's, I guess, start with where your map as it stands and how you feel about particularly the floor of Harris with these three Midwestern states.
yeah. So those states have been like it's an interesting kind of ironic situation, or only kind of ironic if you like have like if you follow this stuff really closely. Because like I think like 8 years ago, the kind of consensus what the future of politics would be is that like you would have Republicans who would dominate in the Midwest, and you would have Democrats who would like do really well like, in the Sun Belt, and that was like the future of the country. That's the way things were headed. And there's like that did happen to some extent. We have like kind of seen some Sun Belt states that weren't competitive before, like Arizona and Georgia, come into contention. But at the same time, like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, which were sort of expected by this point to be like kind of more solid for Republicans, they haven't really moved to the right as much as people really expected since 2016. They're still very, very competitive as they were like 8 years ago. And ever since the Dobbs decision in 2022, you've arguably seen a shift to the left in those states, primarily because they have so many people, so many independent white secular voters who like were kind of interested in Trump and shifted towards Trump, and like more like secular people in the suburbs who were also like Republican and have now shifted to Democrats. Like there's a lot of people in those states who are both pro-choice and like more like Republican leaning, who have shifted or become less firmly Republican since Dobbs. And it's created a situation where even as other parts of the country have moved to the right, like New York or California or the Deep South, and that's kind of pushed the national popular vote to the right to a certain extent, those states have stuck with Democrats more like firmly than the rest of the country. So you saw in 2022, you had like Democrats winning by double digits in Pennsylvania and Michigan. At the same time, they were really struggling in other states like New York. And that polling, that kind of dynamic has carried over since then. It was even the case when Biden was in the race, where he was relatively somewhat competitive in those states, even as he was tanking nationally. And it gave him a very, very, very narrow path to 270 electoral votes. If he won Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and like all like the safer blue states like Virginia, Minnesota, New Hampshire, he would win the electoral college 270 to 268. If you assuming he also got the Nebraska electoral vote, the one Omaha, and that was always his like the narrowest path for him. That was the only real road he had to like getting a majority, at least in my eyes, when he started tanking in the Sun Belt. And since Kamala came in, the big difference has been you've had this kind of across-the-board shift in her favor, which has really solidified her position in the Midwest to the point where you're seeing polls in Michigan, Pennsylvania. And with legitimate pollsters, it's very kind of rare at this point to see a Trump lead in those states. And at the same time, the Sun Belt is back entirely in contention. So her floor is higher and her ceiling is higher, I think, than Trump's is right now. And I think, like, you can a lot of the models are showing it close to 50-50, but I think that plus some other fundamentals based stuff that I'll try to get to a bit later, I think at this point, like, you'd rather be in her position than Trump's.
Oh, well, certainly. I mean, in the fundamentals of the race, it's quite clear. It's just, you do right that she's kind of raised his floor a bit with this extremely safe approach that seems like a relic from the Biden campaign, or, it's
Yeah.
still the exact same people that are running this. She kept on the entire infrastructure. It would have been a very tall task for her, given the situation, the uniqueness of the situation, for her to build a campaign team up from scratch. So it's partly like,
Yeah.
it's hard to, it's a chicken or the egg situation, but she's running in a very safe campaign, and it seems in keeping with the Biden strategy from before, which makes no sense to me, because she can actually talk. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's that. There's like the messaging aspects of it where it does seem kind of more geared toward winning over just moderate white voters or Republican leaning. Yeah, like that aspect of it. There's a bit of an argument to be made that kind of might help more. Like you could see, what I've found interesting is that we have seen a shift in the Midwest towards her a little bit since the debate, when she really went all in on kind of just the aesthetic of looking like a strong, capable leader, or kind of shying away from policy. At the same time, she's kind of shored up her position in states like Pennsylvania. Her polling in like states like Arizona and Georgia, to a smaller extent, there was one good poll for her yesterday, but like generally the polling here has been like a bit kind of leaning towards Trump lately. She's done a bit of a better job at solidifying I mean, I don't even want to give her credit for like doing, because the Midwest has been leaning more Democratic for years, since before she came into the race. I think she's just failing. She's doing a decent job at doing a poor campaign strategy. She's doing a good, in my opinion.
Right.
She's doing a good job of projecting. Like if her whole idea is just like kind of just the aesthetics of looking like a strong and capable president and nothing else, and not really committing to anything solid, and not solving the question where people don't know what the hell you will do as president. I guess she's done a good job of playing that, but it hasn't really resolved any like people's like real like kind of concerns with her. Like I don't like, because I'm trying to be a bit rosier for her, but it's just so baffling for me. I can't help but go back to it. We've consistently seen that like the biggest concern people have with her is that they don't really know how different she is from Biden, or like what she stands for, like what she believes in, or what she'd do as president. And you have her team talking to CNN just outright saying like, oh, well, people only say that they want to do, that people don't actually care about policy. They want us to go on Oprah. Like it's like explicitly trying to do a substanceless campaign, except for the substance allows you to like sell out to pro-crypto donors, I guess.
Right.
But like,
right.
And I think it's making
she's not emphasizing the good stuff from the substance. Like, when is the last? This is overall a positive view of how the campaign is going in terms of like the outcome. Yes, I just want to reiterate that. But like, why there's no talk about what was the stuff from a month ago about price gouging, and even her manufacturing economic pitch. Like David Dayen had a great write up about it. The stuff she emphasized and said out loud is all geared towards business leaders, and it's the most conservative elements and tax cuts. But then you read the fine print, and it's a continuation of some of the good stuff from the Biden campaign, from the Biden administration in regards to manufacturing.
Yeah, it's like she's trying to say. Usually the justification people give as to why she needs, like, politicians need to do is like, oh, it's a world of big fundraising. These are billion-dollar campaigns. Like, we have to spend all this money for. But like, she has a massive fundraising advantage. Most Democrats in the country don't really need to like they have so much money from like the small donors over the past number of cycles. We haven't really been seeing like this kind of like bending over backwards for like Mark Cuban or crypto billionaires, because they really don't have to. It speaks to like kind of a lack of imagination, like where they're just trying to it's like, I mean, this was supposed to be kind of like a more positive thing, but I think like it's kind of an issue that you have. And I think you've also seen it in New York, where if you have a certain political class that is so kind of ossified and only really gets like their like power like through intra-elite wrangling, that's really the only world they know how to understand. Like all of the people on her team, she's a VP for a guy who like beat like an establishment opponent like 16 years ago, and then took on her entire team for his administration. Like, there hasn't been the kind of shakeup that you see like at the state level, where the politicians, like I would say Walz, are like a lot more kind of like they practice a politics that actually makes some kind of like discernible sense.
Right. And I would hope that maybe after the campaign is over, that is incorporated into, say, the machine that she has or whatever, because This is very different than the infrastructure that, say, Obama came in with the second time around, or what Biden had in 2020. She's a little bit more. She doesn't have the same kind of machine behind her, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, and hopefully they move away from this extremely safe, do no harm strategy. But
it's not even really safe, I would say.
Well, how they perceive it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We don't see it in that same way. But can you explain to me why they're not polling better in the Sun Belt? Because my contention always has been Arizona and Nevada both have abortion on the ballot. In Arizona, Gallego is leading Carrie Lake consistently with a double-digit lead.
Yeah.
Why is there that? Why is she losing in polling in Arizona, but Gallego is up by like 10, 12 points?
Yeah, this goes back to like the kind of the failure to separate her from Biden that we were just talking about. Basically, and what I was saying about the fundamentals earlier when I first got on the call, the fundamentals for like the past, basically since Dobbs for Democrats, every single indicator we get from actual voters shows that like there has been a breaking point with the current version of the GOP. Like Dobbs, I think, was kind of a straw that broke the camel's back. We have had all the special elections we've seen like since like basically 2023 show Democrats like with actual voters overperforming benchmarks from 2020, which was an election they already won. We have like the Washington primary, like which is like a sample size of 2 million people voting on basically an early general election. The results there corresponded with like a Democratic lead nationally of 4 points. That's roughly in line with what they won in 2020. You have at the Senate level, we've had these Senate Democrats who have been polling and like who aren't particularly remarkable or even incumbents. Like, I mean, I guess Alyssa Slotkin and like Gallego are fine, but they're not like world beaters or anything. They've been polling incredibly well against their Trump kind of imitator opponents, like for the past 2 years. And you've seen like the big gap between Biden and them was always that like, well, Biden's seen as this failure and he's regarded differently because of his age than these people. Kamala comes in, but instead of matching that kind of baseline level of strength that these Senate Democrats and like other Democrats in special elections and in primaries have been able to manage, she has kind of split halfway, and it leaves the race in a very close position because, and what voters have said repeatedly, is that they don't know precisely how she differs from Biden, like on concrete issues. And I think it is a consequence of this campaign strategy that's not only failing to like address that, but is outright playing into it. Because like it's one thing like when you're just a new figure and people are doubtful about you, they're going to have concerns. But like when like everything she's like a lot of what she's done, I think since really she picked Walz, has been like just playing into that. She went out to Axios every single day to disavow some past position from 2019, even when they could have. Like I think Medicare for All was a really perfect place for her to look consistent and break from Biden at the same time. She like reneged on that. She reneged on all of her past positions. Her like that, there was like the line where Trump said that like, oh, her policy page is just run, spot, run because it's just platitudes. And like it's kind of true. She just has like a list of 4 things. It's just YIMBYism and child tax credits. And for a certain kind of voter, I think like a more like well-heeled, like wealthier kind of northern person where your misgivings about Biden are a bit more abstract, like they're able to sort of look past that and be like, well, I'll just see what I want in her. For I think like the lower income minority communities that we have seen Gallego outperforming Kamala with, when you don't see any difference between her and Biden and what you perceive as the policy failures of Biden are hurting you in a very concrete way that like somebody in like Oakland County, Michigan, like might not. Like her not being able to break from him is a lot more serious to you. It's like you consider that as a material issue in a way that like people who just abstractly thought Biden was weak don't.
Right.
So I think that like by trying to be so cute with how she's campaigning, she is actively alienating these people who I think otherwise would really want to like her. People want to like her.
First of all, we're getting corrections. It's Gallego. Apologies, I never took Spanish.
Yeah.
I always
Yeah, me neither.
struggle with that one. But Druber writes in saying,
Mhm.
ask Ettinger if he thinks Kamala is trying to help Dems win in Montana, Texas, and Florida. It seems like that's the strategy, just to push back slightly. I mean, the gun thing, I own a gun, I'm going to shoot you in my home or whatever. I mean,
It was corny. It's corny.
I know it's corny,
inauthentic.
but don't you see what they're doing at least on that front though? Like that you can at least see the strategy if that's what they're trying to do.
I get the idea, but I think that like these kind of like discrete ideological positions and even like kind of aesthetic little like totems and tokens that she's laying out, I think that like that just kind of plays into this larger kind of like this. Her issue is that her issue why she was so unpopular for so long wasn't that she was old like Biden. It's because she was seen as like this empty suit who was inexperienced and people didn't really know like where she stood. And she is campaigning to a certain extent like she actually is an empty suit who doesn't believe in anything. It's
at least in recent weeks, I can hear you on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
at the beginning, there was kind of a more forceful kind of approach, but they've been frozen recently. It's like, and it's a shame because like a lot of this, like she is better at giving speeches and debates than she might have in the past. Like the kind of aesthetic is there, but the content that could make people who really like do have sincere material problems with this administration, like who I think would otherwise really want to vote for her against Trump, she's just like it's her campaign strategy. It is their explicit philosophy not to provide that. And I mean, it'll probably work out, but like it does not need to be this hard.
Right, exactly. I think that's the point, is that at the end of the day, the picture is still pretty good, but we could be increasing things along the margins. Like, I mean, so North Carolina, Mark Robinson obviously is a huge boost to Democrats there. I think she's going to win North Carolina, but which is interesting because Carrie Lake doesn't seem to be having the same effect for her in Arizona, right? But North Carolina is definitely in play and continuously trending in the Democrats' direction. What's your sense of the race there?
Yeah. I think it's the reason why I can really believe her doing better in North Carolina than here in Georgia or Arizona is the demographic thing. North Carolina is the whitest of all of the Sun Belt states. It's more similar to Michigan and Pennsylvania than it is. It's more similar to Georgia, but like it's more in line with those demographics. I think it's about 10% more white. So that gives her, since her numbers with the whites have generally been pretty strong, that gives her a bit more of a floor. The Robinson thing, people like really do disagree with that. People like try to act smart about it and say he won't matter. Like, I mean, I guess like historically the idea of reverse coattails, there's not a ton of evidence for it. But at this point, you're really pushing that concept to its breaking point. Like those types of like scandals do drive turnout. Like there will be like kind of a sense of urgency among voters who might otherwise be sort of alienated in this race about like Trump, who's a very known quantity, and Kamala, who's only break-even favorables. In North Carolina, there will be like kind of that will drive people, I think, to vote to the same extent that like an abortion referendum might be able to in a different state. I can really believe that, and I think it really does matter because everybody talks like all the time about Pennsylvania, which is 19 electoral votes. But she could lose Pennsylvania, and that she might necessarily not lose the election if she wins North Carolina and Nevada or North Carolina and Georgia. That'll be enough to kind of sub in for that one state. I think North Carolina and Georgia can make it for both Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. I don't have like the math right out in front of me, but like this southeastern part of the country, which I think a lot of people are taking granted, like, or kind of assuming Trump will win, is a very, very real threat for him because that's 32 electoral votes between like us and North Carolina.
And Georgia, I mean, this Fox poll that came out this morning where she's winning, it seems like a bit of an outlier, but we also know that Democrats have been able to have a good ground game in Georgia. So that's also a question here.
I can believe it living here. I think one thing with Georgia that a lot of people don't understand, like once we do early voting, you can actually get a good sense of what the results will be here because we don't track voters by party registration, but we do track them by race for some reason. So you can actually get a good sense of what the racial demographics of here will, like the state will be, like for a number of weeks heading into election day. And if black turnout, I think the rule in Georgia is if black turnout is at 30% and the white Democrats get 30% of the white vote, they win statewide. and I could see Kamala hitting both of those benchmarks. I think that the kind of underappreciated sort of upside for her is she's the first black candidate at a national level since Obama in 2012, and just a small boost in black turnout for that reason could substantially impact the results here.
And New York, you mentioned this earlier. You've adjusted your assessment of how much the Democrats need to win the popular vote by in terms of how that would be reflective in the Electoral College to win the election. I feel like in the past it had been around 3 points, or 2 to 3 points had been the consensus.
It was 2 points. It was roughly 2.5 points in 2016. It was 3.5 points in 2020. People expected it to get worse this year for Democrats. They'd have to win by 4 or 5, which would be a very tall order. That is not easy. But Democrats have kind of shed a lot of votes in New York, California, and also in the rural Deep South, like is kind of another overlooked version of that. Our numbers there have gotten pretty rough in recent years because the people don't really care about abortion at all. But a lot of the polling in New York shows Kamala only leading by like 10 to 14 points, which is enough to win the state. But Biden, I think, in 2021 by like 27. So it's like a significantly reduced margin.
And that's Kathy Hochul having minus 20 favorability per the last Siena New York Times poll.
She's less popular than Trump in New York.
And oh my God! And then the Eric Adams thing is going to also affect Democrats too, right?
Yeah, I don't know how much it'll help, how much it'll hurt, but it certainly can't help them.
Yeah, it certainly can't. So that's, I think, maybe why you adjust a little bit of the national total in terms of assessing the Democrats' chances. Okay, lastly, before we get to your polling guide, the Texas and Florida Senate races. Colin Allred seems to be gaining some momentum in Texas. What is your view of how those races can go? And are the Democrats being smart in putting resources into those races? I saw that I think Bernie Sanders and AOC are going down there to stump for Allred, which is interesting because Bernie Sanders still has pretty high favorables with Latino voters.
Bernie's the last Democrat.
Yeah.
Bernie's always been very popular with, not always, but since 2020, he's done very well with Latinos. I think there was a study that showed that a lot of the Latinos who voted for him in 2020 went on to vote for Trump later on that year. You could predict pretty strongly how much of a shift in the Rio Grande Valley there would be between Clinton and Biden shifting to Trump between 2016 and 2020. You could track that pretty closely by how well Bernie did in the primary that year. So I think he has a real appeal in that area. AOC obviously is a political celebrity and will always get a lot of people paying attention. Cruz is a very interesting figure, and I think he makes this a very interesting race because he's a unique incumbent who is so kind of unpopular and noxious that he consistently underperforms his own party. And in Texas, you have another case where even if the demographics aren't the same as in the Midwest, you have such hardline Republican policies at the state level that has kept, I think, the Democratic base very mobilized to an extent that isn't true in California or New York, even though they're both, all three states are very non-white. So the polling there hasn't been horrifically bad for Kamala. Her numbers look pretty similar to what Biden's are. Allred is outrunning her by 2 or 3 points, which is enough to put him in the margin of error in some polls. It probably, the way things are going now, if everything matches the polls exactly, he'll probably lose relatively narrowly. But if there's a shift in favor of Democrats at the last minute, which might be possible, or if they're being undercounted in the polls, which we can only really guess at this point if that might be happening, though there are some theories you could have as to why they might be, he could probably come out ahead. There was one poll that had him leading by a point, which is the first time I think we've seen that, I think since 2018 with Beto. So, Florida, I don't really I just kind of write off.
Well,
I don't expect anything from Florida.
Do the cannabis and abortion ballot measures play any role in Florida? I mean, it's a 60% threshold, but yeah.
We've historically seen Florida consistently vote for more left-wing like ballot measures while also voting for Republicans at the state level, like without much of a problem. Their threshold for cognitive dissonance is very high.
And the threshold for the complete malfeasance of the Democrats in Florida and their incompetence is probably a better word for it.
Yeah.
Should not be overstated. They're horrible.
Oh God, yeah, they're barely functional.
Yeah.
It does suck the one time they got like a progressive nominee there for like the first time, just like Claude Pepper. He was the most corrupt man alive.
Right, exactly. We'll end this part, and I just want to read how your piece started here about this election isn't a toss-up. With the exception of the VP debate in early October, which if history is any indication won't have any impact on the election at all, there are no set major events to get to between now and November. The tickets have been confirmed, the conventions have been held, the debates have been debated, and Trump's trials and sentencings have been delayed and postponed. Absent possible developments overseas, which I will go over later in this article, all we have left to watch going forward are the polls, which are now more important than ever before. Essentially, you later in the piece, you talk about if an all-out war breaks out in the Middle East, that's a potential wild card here. Right now, Israel is bombing Beirut.
Yep, carpet bombing.
So as we speak, this is a possibility. First give us the assessment of the race as it stands if nothing changes, and then all-out war and how that could affect the election.
Yeah, so the big problem, and this is sort of like, this is both, like, so as it stands, I think if you go off of stuff like the Washington primary and the special elections, and you assume that Kamala will mostly be able to, like, kind of perform in line with a generic Democrat, which is not a total guarantee, but, like, probably should happen. I mean, like, she could have made it easier on herself, but she didn't, and we'll see how that goes. She probably will, like, I think she is, is the favorite in the Midwest. Those states all vote pretty closely together. Just those alone will be enough for her to win. North Carolina, Georgia, and I think I would say are like kind of the more fruitful opportunities for her. The Southwest, because Latino voting has been like so bad for Democrats like in recent years, I'm a little more skeptical of. Nevada, the polling has been pretty decent for her, but I am a little wary about that state. Like I know like what the history is, and Democrats always kind of come back there, and it doesn't look bad now. But like just the demographics just look so kind of like not very promising for them. She has enough she has like her base in the Midwest is kind of solidified to the extent that Trump's base in the Sun Belt is not, and she only needs her base in the Midwest to win. So I think I would like have her as kind of like, I'd rather be in her position than Trump's right now. I think she's in a more solid place. A war breaking out, on one hand, it won't really do much to change how people regard Biden's foreign policy record, and hers as an extension of that. Biden has his foreign policy record, contrary to all of his fucking like whining about AUKUS, it could have convinced you otherwise. His foreign policy record has been one of his worst issues. People think he's been a failure in that regard. Trump has been favored on foreign policy since they started polling this race. It's one of his biggest strengths. There was like a poll, I think, this just goes so contrary to how like the Kamala people have been campaigning. Her second best issue was trans issues. It was tied with abortion as her second best issue. Like this was a Fox poll, and her second worst issue was Israel Hamas. People consider her and Biden to be completely inept on this. I think she had a perfect opportunity to distance herself from him on that, as much like Hubert Humphrey did in 1968, and that benefited him tremendously at the end of the campaign. But she has not done that. She has hugged very closely to Biden. She gave a full day for him during the DNC. So she will be connected to what he does. That is her own choice. She has made the decision to stick by him. So any increase in salience to what is already, what some polling averages have shown to be Biden's single worst issue. He has, I think, the Real Clear Politics average had him below 30% on Israel-Palestine approval. That's worse than his numbers on immigration and the economy. Just, you cannot get much worse than here. People think he's been a complete disaster. I don't think his numbers can get any worse than that. The past below 30%, you're getting like Watergate levels where people are just supporting you because like they're Democrats and they're not ever going to say you do anything wrong. All-out war could maybe raise a salience of that in a way that hurts her. But at the same time, you can only go so low on how much like people think you fail with a certain like issue. And I don't know, like, to what extent Americans even really know what Lebanon is, like, to really make a big judgment on it. They'll probably just, like, kind of in their minds, just understand that there's another Biden foreign policy flop and just judge it the same way they've judged it for the past year, which is that he's been a complete disgrace.
Well, you mentioned trans issues in the sense of like that does when issues poll in a particular way, the second question has to be, does that poll translate to how people vote? Like the economy, it's very clear that that is what translates into people voting. The thing that an all-out war would do in terms of increasing the salience for people in the country is that would mean that the United States is involved, right, in some ground operation, and that would be a disaster, obviously.
Oh, if U.S. troops are getting directly involved in it, that would be seen as a complete failure far beyond what has even occurred so far. And I think that could very meaningfully hurt Kamala's chances if she doesn't use it as an opportunity to break from Biden.
Okay.
It would really be a do or die moment for her.
Yep. But as you say, the dynamics are so locked in at this point, 5 weeks out, that would be very difficult, I think, to make that pivot because she hasn't done so already. But
no, that's been done in the past.
Right.
Hubert Humphrey called for a bombing halt in October in 1968.
But he lost.
And that worked.
He lost.
But it swung it around for him. Like he gained a lot of points. September 30th, indeed, in fact,
that was the date?
Was the date that he did the speech.
Yeah, he was down like 20 points.
He gained a lot of momentum after that. He only
lost by 1.
Yeah. No, I agree that it would be the right move, right? It's just, she
should do it, and she's not going to, and that's going to be a failure. So hopefully she can limp over the finish line failing like that.
Yeah.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.